Well, hello, everybody. Hope everyone's doing well. So, this week we are discussing chapter 17. If I can get it, there we go. Concentration. Um, Once again, in your books, hopefully by now you understand where I'm coming from. Um, Similar to last week, I want this just to be more of a discussion type of presentation rather than me going through slide by slide some bullet points of what I have prepared. So you have the slides once again. So you can, of course, utilize those as a supplementation to this video. And so this video will hopefully add to your knowledge of you reading the chapter first and foremost. That's the number one thing that you should be doing. And then number two, you can use those slides to make notes as you're reading through the chapter. And then after you've done those two things, you can watch this video. And once again, hopefully it will add to the furthering of your knowledge about whatever concepts we'll be learning about or whatever chapter we're reading. So today we're going over concentration. This, to say the least, was the biggest, if not, it perhaps is the biggest chapter in the entire book. For good reason. There is a lot of stuff in and around the concept of concentration. There's a lot of sports psychologists, both practitioners and academics and researchers and scholars, who would argue that this is the most important skill, especially application-wise, that one can harness or that one can obtain, is being able to concentrate. So placing your concentration, managing one's attention from a broader perspective so that you can be focused in on what you need to be focused in when you need to be focused. And so being able to recognize when it's drifting and bringing it to where it needs to be. One of the very first questions coming from these researchers is, it is difficult to conceive of any aspect of psychology that may be more central to the enhancement of skill learning and expert performance than attention. So going into this chapter with that in mind, where attention, concentration, focus, a lot of these are used interchangeably, and we're going to break those down here in just a second. But going into this chapter knowing that this is a very important, complex skill, especially from a research standpoint. There's a lot of research that goes into this. I know in my time in working with the military and now in working with athletes and performers that attention management, so being able to provide different skills and strategies for the performers and the athletes that I'm working with in regards to attention management, are essential. And it's one reason why anxiety and stress sets in, because of one's attention and where they're attending and what they're attending to, when in fact they should be attending to other things. Hopefully that makes sense. But again, there's a lot that goes into this chapter. And so my challenge and really advice would be to read it as best as you can, try to understand it, utilize the slides as a supplementation, and then bring in this hopefully 20-minute-ish video of how it can add to the furthering of your knowledge in regards to concentration. So concentration and attention, interchangeably those are being used, right? Especially in pop culture, and even by educators and researchers. However, if you're going to get down to the actual nitty and gritty and use them correctly, first off, you can use them interchangeably, but concentration is the preferable term for practitioners within sports psychology, or coaches, sports psychologists or sports psychology consultants. They usually utilize the term concentration. Attention is normally utilized by researchers. So if we're studying the broad concepts of concentration, usually that word concentration is preferable for practitioners, those out in the field working with individuals. And attention, once again, is more of the standard term or normalized term within scholarship, within literature by researchers, etc. So that's that. And then getting down to focus is the spotlight or the lens that one uses underneath the umbrella of concentration and or attention. So I have my concentration. It's out here. It's broad. It's this kind of ambiguous, large spectrum. Now, if I were to concentrate on one thing, then I would be utilizing my focus. And that is your spotlight. So you hear that term or that metaphor used, I think, in a lot of contexts where one's attention can be a spotlight. Well, when you actually are spotlighting and placing that on something, you're focusing. Concentration, attention, focus. Hopefully that makes sense. So how are they defining attention? Once again, a very common theme that we see throughout this book is there's not one definition, right? And so what is something that we can go off of to help make sense of this term? So on page 382, really kind of the first page of this chapter, 381, 382, around there, this is how they're defining attention. So attention and its role in human performance has always been up for debate, blah, blah, blah. So William James is a famous psychologist in the late 1800s, early 1900s. He started to articulate what this meant. And it's kind of a long definition that you see here at the bottom of 382, but it gives you just a useful context of where you can go from in terms of fundamentals. So attention, William James, a psychologist. Everyone knows what attention is. It is taking possession by the mind in clear and vivid form of one out of what seems several simultaneously possible objects or trains of thought. Focalization, concentration of consciousness are the essence. It implies withdrawal from some things in order to deal effectively with others. That's the most important part that I want you to take away. Attention. It implies withdrawal from some things in order to deal effectively with others. So simply, where are you placing power to? And then how can you utilize this power of attention to place focus on different stimuli within your environment? And so a useful definition of concentration and or attention, maybe I'll just stick with concentration to not confuse anybody. But once again, interchangeably attention, concentration. So here are some parts or tenets of how the book, and even more specifically William James, articulates concentration. So what are some things that you can utilize and imply within this concept of concentration? Well, focusing on the relevant cues in the environment, so a selective attention, aka focus. Maintaining that attentional focus over time, so once you select it, being able to sustain it and maintain it, or being mindful about it, recognizing when it's drifting and bringing it back. I froze, but I'm back. So that's number 2. Number 3, having awareness of the situation and performance errors, being mindful of it. That's what mindfulness is being aware. And then number 4, being able to shift attentional focus when necessary. And so those are just some key parts or tenets of what might concentration look like, especially in an application process if you're trying to study it and observe it. So concentration is the ability to maintain focus on relevant environmental cues, if we're looking at something pretty simple. And then once that maintainment of attention is specific, we are looking more at focus. So focus is very much part of concentration. Really, concentration wouldn't exist without focus, and vice versa. So to give you some context of What this would look like in the field. Do I want to go there yet? I'm wondering if I want to go here yet because it's still not for a little bit of time. I'm not going to go there yet. So I wanted to touch on this broad, narrow, external, internal processes of focus, but I don't want to go there yet because it's a little bit further within the chapter. So starting on page 382, they talk about being able to maintain focus. And they mention some very interesting statistics, and they give you a wonderful example of a lot of golf and a lot of tennis, which I think are very pertinent because you're having to maintain focus over a long period of time. But they give you a wonderful stat on page 383. The median length of time during which thought content remains on target is approximately 5 seconds. So studies have shown that normally most human beings are able to maintain this focus, this concentrated focus, for 5 seconds. So that is where mindfulness training really comes into play, because mindfulness isn't about getting rid of distracting thoughts and getting rid of negativity or interfering thoughts, but it's recognizing when those are there and becoming more aware of when they're there. So instead of 5 seconds, you can make it 10 seconds. Or instead of 5 seconds maintaining and then 20 seconds not maintaining, it'll be 5 seconds maintaining and 10 seconds out here in the unattainment. So just being able to make the shift and recognize when that shift is necessary is interesting. And so for an example, like in golf, the reason concentration is so pertinent is because of the amount of time that these individuals, these golfers, have to think. And so one of the extraordinary amounts of mental obstacle that golfers have is being able to reconcentrate and regain the concentration in between shots. I don't know the percentage, but if you were going to do a 4-hour round of golf, 18 holes, 4 hours roughly, you're actually playing and hitting a ball, what, 10% of that time? If that, right? When you're actually swinging and hitting a ball, the other 90% of those 4 hours is thinking about what you're going to be doing. And so being able to, in that 90% of that round, being able to utilize the skill of concentration and place it to where it needs to go, recognize it when it's drifting and where it shouldn't be, and place it to where it needs to go is a profound advantageous skill to have mentally, so that you're able to bring this mental aspect of concentration that will then affect your behaviors, like swinging a golf club or putting and just the touch of the club on the ball, just for an example. So that's just one example of being able to maintain it in a very specific sport like golf. That's, again, really hard to do. They go over some of these different things of shifting and being able to maintain it. They continue on this thread on page 385, and how the shifting of attentional focus is paramount. Baseball is another example, a long sport, and you're only actually hitting a ball or throwing a ball. Again, I don't know the percentage, but what, 10% of the time that you're actually playing? All the other time you're sitting and waiting and thinking about what you should be doing or what might happen. And so for me personally, in coming from a researcher standpoint and educational, both golf and baseball are two great examples of where concentration and or attention are profoundly important. So you're able to once again recognize when your concentration is somewhere else, detrimental to your performance, and recognizing it so you're able to bring it back to where it needs to be in the moment, to where it needs to be. And that's attention management, and that is a mental skill / strategy where a sports psychologist can come in and help them obtain and practice this skill, just like a strength and conditioning coach with bench press. You're starting out with a lightweight sports psychologist is coming in, recognizing that attention is important and moving up in the progression so it becomes an actual skill and an advantage to the athlete. So in relation to this, especially golf, with shifting the attentional focus and the importance that it is within this particular sport, research has shown that golfers were more internally process oriented when training, but were more externally result oriented during competition. And so now we're going to get into this, whether the attention is external or internal, whether it's narrow or whether it's broad, and the importance of that. Before I get into that, on 386 and 387, they go over the selectivity process of attention, the capacity or the energy that it takes to place your attention on something, and the importance that, once again, to be aware of where you're placing your attention, because what we're thinking about, we're giving literal energy to. And so being able to be selective of where we're placing our attention. So now attention management becomes energy management. So being selective of where to do that, so you have the energy throughout a round of golf or a baseball game or a volleyball game to finish, and to finish successfully. And so now on page 388, so this is called essentially Niederfer's model. And Niederfer, 1976-ish, started to form this model of the identifying types of attentional focus. So the different types of being able to be attentive. And what does that model look like? Essentially, there are 4 components. So there's broad, narrow. So essentially, am I observing peripherally, or is it more narrow / specifically? And then, is my focus external? Am I looking at things in the external environment? Or am I actually bringing my attention or my concentration on my internal state? How's my breathing? What am I thinking about? So this metacognition of thinking about thinking. How am I feeling? My heart rate is rapid. So is it internal, external? And then is it broad or narrow? So they give you some amazing examples of what this would look like. And so sticking to the sport of golf. So they give you this example of hitting off of the tee. And so those that aren't familiar with golf, on a par 4, par 5, you're using a driver, you're on the tee box, right? And so you get up on the tee box and you're doing all of these different routines and looking at the fairway to where you should hit the ball, how far you should hit the ball, what club you should use. Should it be a driver? Usually on a par 4 or par 5, it is a driver. And the swing pattern of that, the wind, the environment, the obstacles in the way. Is there a sand trap? Are there weeds? Are there trees on the off of the fairway? How skinny is the fairway? How wide is the fairway? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so they give you, again, starting on page with this narrow, broad, external, internal, this Niederfer's model. So picture a golfer on the tee box. They're about to hit the shot. And so on page 383, they mention this: an external focus, so outside the body, is focusing on, so let's start with this, external broad, okay? So this is what this model looks like. So we're on the tee box, and I'm utilizing the attentional focus or type of attentional focus of external broad, okay? So what that means is I'm looking at the hole in my environment. So externally, I'm looking out, right? And being broad about it is I'm looking at the fairway. I'm noticing there's a sand trap on the right. I'm noticing there's water on the left. I'm noticing that there's another sand trap in front of the green, and so I have to avoid that. I'm noticing that the hole is approximately 430 yards away, and so I'm okay to swing as hard as I can because I'm usually around 350, 320, whatever. And so externally, broadly viewing my my environment in terms of my attention. Now, internally broad. So now I'm looking at what I should be using or utilizing. And then again, they touch on this on page 383. Right here, let's see here. Yeah, 383 in the middle of the page. And so internally broad would be, what club should I use? Am I okay to use my driver? Well, if the hole is 430 yards, then I'm okay. There's an example of that. And now I've done both external broad and internal broad. Now let's go external narrow. So an external narrow would be, where should I place my feet in relation to the ball as I'm hitting it? Or in relation to the wind, am I aiming more left or am I aiming more right? So externally narrowing down where I'm placing my focus. And usually in that case, off of the tee, it's right on the ball. Now, internal narrow. So I'm observing everything that's going on internally. How's my breathing? How's my heart rate? How's the grip and the sensation of my hands with the club head? So placing it even more narrow to me specifically internally. So going from broad, narrow external to broad, narrow internally, different scenarios, and they give you a wonderful example that you can utilize on page 389, just where you can test yourself in terms of this model. Just a simple model of what can be done in terms of understanding attention and concentration better, and especially helping individuals train where their attention needs to be in the moment that it needs to be. Like for a quarterback, after they snap the ball, would it be more efficacious or advantageous, useful for a quarterback if they're passing in the pocket? Would it be more beneficial to be viewing or utilizing this attentional type of external broad, or would it be more beneficial to be viewing external narrow or internal broad? So placing the attention where it needs to be, when it needs to be, is part of this skill set. And this just gives you a model or a foundation of where you can go to take this. So after defining attention and giving you some examples of the different types of attention, they go into distractors of attention. And I know we're already at 20 minutes, and so I'm going to start to wrap up here in the next 5 minutes because I don't want this to be too long. But they go into the importance of, once again, the utilization of placing your attention or your concentration on where it needs to be, when it needs to be in the moment. So not attending to past events, because we're not worrying about what happened. We're worrying about what's going to happen or what's happening right now. And not even attending to future events. So it's the first quarter in a football game. I shouldn't be thinking about a 2-minute drill in the fourth quarter. And then the importance of choking under pressure and the phenomenon of choking and why people choke. So a lot of research has shown that one reason why elite performers especially choke under pressure. And so you see seasoned veterans in the NBA miss free throws, and they're usually 85% free throw shooters. Why are they missing? Their attention is not placed on where it needs to be in that moment, so it's affecting them behaviorally. It's affecting how they're actually acting. So for an example, a lot of research has shown that seasoned athletes or elite athletes should be placing their attention externally, because internally the actual skill set of doing the motions, kinesthetic motions, at that point is already there. They have it down. They don't need to pay attention to it. So shooting a free throw, the mechanics of that should be automatic, this automatic processing. However, the elite athletes that do fail, instead of externally viewing what's going on in their environment, this pressure starts to get to them, and so they think, oh my gosh, I have to make this. I have to make sure my elbow's at 90 degrees and I have a good wrist flick, and I have to make sure that I have my hand on the right part of the ball, and et cetera, et cetera. So now they're thinking internally of their mechanics, their kinesthetic motions, their motor movement, when it shouldn't be that way. And so it's placing restriction, it's placing stiffness on movements that normally isn't there. And ultimately their attention and placing it there is affecting how they're shooting. And in many cases they choke or they miss. Just an example of that. And then they go over tons of different examples of being able to understand this phenomenon of choking and the reason of why people choke. It can be external distractors, it can be internal distractors, auditory distractors, visual distractors. I know that's very common, especially in college basketball, where the fans are right behind the hoop trying to distract you. Their attention is on the fans trying to distract them when it should be on the rim or making the shot, right? And then they talk about, towards the end of the chapter, just some simple skills of how you can start to enhance one's concentration. And one awesome skill is self-talk. So your inner dialogue, what are you saying to yourself that's causing detriment to your attention and your behaviors, or being adding benefit to your cognitions and your behaviors as well. And so being able to train your self-talk, once again becoming aware of what you're saying and training how you can make it more advantageous. Positive self-talk, instructional self-talk, motivational self-talk, bringing in mantras and cues and power words or sentences to help you with ultimately your attention or your concentration. Self-talk is a big thing. It's usually the number one indicator of why concentration is faltering, is you're starting to talk to yourself ineffectively and you're paying attention to that. That's one huge indication of why concentration is faltering. So being able to improve that. They give you some wonderful examples of thought stopping and implementation and combining self-talk with your own feedback, and then being able to assess that. And then they go over some more actual measures of how you can measure self-talk. So EEG measures actual neurobiofeedback, placing electrodes on your brain and reading brain waves. They give you some examples of psychophysiological measures. That's one example. Heartbeat's another example, placing different parameters on that. And then again, improving with cue words and simulations and developing competition plans. In my opinion, a lot of this is mindfulness training. So mindfulness essentially meaning paying attention in the present moment, non-judgmentally. So being aware of what you're thinking and what you're doing, and having the influence, not necessarily the control, but the influence to change that relationship with how your attention is encompassed, or taking control over your own life. So being mindful of it and learning that skill of mindfulness to be able to harness this skill ultimately of attention and concentration. That's chapter 17. It's a lot. It's, again, one of the biggest, if not the biggest chapter in the book, for good reason, because there's a lot of research and there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. And so my challenge would be to you to read it, but if you don't have time to read the whole thing, please glance over at least some of the important, bold concepts within it, so you're able to understand why it is so prevalent and important within sports psychology and performance. Because ultimately, once again, the elite athletes that are consistently performing at a high level, they know how to harness the skill of concentration. One athlete in particular, before his downfall, or at least a certain period of his time, was Tiger Woods. He I mean, he was cited over and over again by other golfers of his crazy, um, awesome amount of being able to concentrate. And he came in with this mentality of, this is what I need to do, and I'm not allowing any external distractors to take me away from it. Or this Mamba mentality of Kobe Bryant. Nobody was going to stand in the way of his concentration, which was to win and to perform at his very, very best. So those are just some examples. I'm sure you can come up with many, many more. I hope you enjoyed it. It's something that I find fascinating, and hopefully this will add to your reading and viewing the slides. If you have any questions, let me know. All right.